The golden sunlight bathed the tarmac as the plane touched down in Montego Bay, Jamaica, stirring excitement in the hearts of honeymooners Kareem and Shanice Morgan. It was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter, their fresh start as husband and wife, away from the noise of their busy lives in Kingston. They had been married just 3 weeks earlier in a glamorous wedding ceremony that made the society pages. Now, it was time to unwind, to laugh, and to reconnect in one of the Caribbean's most picturesque settings. What made this trip unique, however, was the inclusion of Kareem's father, Luther Morgan, a tall, distinguished man in his mid-50s with salt and pepper hair and a commanding presence. Luther wasn't your typical father-in-law tagging along on a couple's honeymoon. He had paid for everything: the private beachfront villa, the all-inclusive luxury resort, the yacht rentals, even a private chef. He insisted on coming, framing it as a family bonding experience and promising to give the couple enough space to enjoy their romantic escape. Shanice had been hesitant at first. She barely knew Luther and had only met him a handful of times before the wedding. He was a successful businessman, the founder of a real estate empire, and widely respected in Jamaican society. But something about him made her nervous. Maybe it was how his eyes lingered just a second too long. Or maybe it was the way he carried himself, like a man who always got what he wanted. Still, Kareem had brushed off her concerns. "Come on, babe," he had said, flashing his charming smile. "He just wants to spend time with us. Trust me, it'll be amazing." So she went along with it. Their villa was nothing short of paradise. A modern 2-story property nestled between swaying palm trees, with a panoramic view of the turquoise Caribbean Sea. The air smelled of sea salt and hibiscus. The sound of waves crashing on the shore played like a lullaby in the background. It was the kind of place people dreamed about but rarely experienced. The first few days passed in a blur of rum cocktails, beach strolls, snorkeling trips, and candlelit dinners. Luther, to everyone's surprise, gave them plenty of space. He spent his days golfing with resort executives or reading alone by the pool. When they did gather for meals, the conversations were lively and warm. Luther often complimented Shanice's intelligence and beauty, which made her blush, though she chalked it up to politeness. But something began to shift by the 4th day. Kareem, ever the workaholic, started taking conference calls in the villa's office, leaving Shanice alone for hours. That's when Luther began to make himself more available, inviting her to breakfast while Kareem worked, offering to show her around the private beach, even asking about her past before Kareem. "Marriage changes things," he told her one morning as they sipped coffee on the balcony, staring out at the endless blue sea. "Sometimes it brings you closer. Sometimes it exposes cracks you didn't know were there." Shanice wasn't sure how to respond, but deep down, she felt it. The loneliness creeping in despite the paradise around her. The perfect getaway, it seemed, was not as perfect as it appeared. Beneath the sun-kissed skies and island breezes, something dangerous and forbidden was beginning to take root. And no one, not Kareem, not Shanice, not even Luther, could have predicted how dark their dream vacation would become. The Morgans' love story was one that looked perfect on paper. Kareem Morgan, 29, was a rising star in the finance sector, sharp-suited, eloquent, and heir to one of the most powerful real estate legacies in Jamaica. He grew up in affluence, schooled abroad, and had a magnetic energy that drew people in. On the surface, he was the picture of success. Shanice, 26, was the contrast. Humble beginnings from Portmore, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. Shanice had fought her way to a scholarship, earned a degree in communications, and carried herself with grace and quiet confidence. When she met Kareem at a charity gala 2 years ago, it felt like fate. A whirlwind romance followed. He showered her with gifts, took her to elite functions, and told anyone who'd listen how she made him a better man. But even before the wedding, there were warning signs. Kareem had a temper, nothing too overt, but sharp enough to leave bruises on the inside. He would shut down during disagreements, throw sarcastic jabs in public, and sometimes vanish for hours without explanation. Shanice told herself it was stress, that he loved her, that every couple had growing pains. She clung to the dream of what their marriage could be, not what it was becoming. Their wedding had been the event of the year, a lavish affair held at a private estate in the Blue Mountains, covered by society pages and Instagram influencers alike. But behind the glamour, Shanice felt disconnected. Even on their wedding night, Kareem had gotten drunk with his groomsmen and passed out before they could even share a private moment. It hurt, but she said nothing. The trip to Montego Bay was supposed to be their reset, their second chance, a way to recapture what brought them together. But as the days passed, it became clear that Kareem hadn't left his workaholic habits behind. His phone never stopped ringing. Every sunset was interrupted by a business call. Every romantic dinner was overshadowed by emails, deals, and investor updates. Shanice tried to be patient. She walked along the beach alone. She explored the island's hidden coves and sipped cocktails by herself at the swim-up bar, smiling at strangers just to feel seen. She even tried initiating intimacy, but Kareem brushed her off with tired excuses. "You're acting like a child," he said one night when she confronted him about the distance between them. "This is real life, Sean. I'm building a future for us." But us was beginning to feel like just her. And then there was Luther. Unlike Kareem, Luther gave her undivided attention. He listened when she spoke, asked about her dreams, and noticed the little things. How she liked her tea, the way she wore her hair, the scar on her wrist from a childhood fall. He was everything Kareem was not: mature, composed, and oddly comforting. One afternoon, while Kareem took a call in the villa office, Shanice found herself on the back deck with Luther, watching the waves. They shared a bottle of wine and a light conversation that slowly drifted into personal territory. "You remind me of my late wife," Luther said softly. "She had your fire, quiet but powerful." Shanice smiled, feeling the heat rise to her cheeks. "Kareem doesn't really talk about her." "He doesn't talk about a lot of things," Luther replied, looking out to sea. There was silence between them for a moment. Not awkward, intimate. It was a silence filled with something unspoken. A dangerous, growing temptation neither of them dared to name. At least not yet. The line between curiosity and desire is thin, sometimes invisible, and once crossed, it can never be uncrossed. By the 6th day of their trip, the rhythm of the Morgan vacation had quietly shifted. Kareem was now more of a shadow in the villa, locked in virtual meetings and late-night investment calls. Shanice's once playful attempts to reconnect had faded into emotional silence. She had stopped dressing up for dinner, stopped waiting for him on the balcony, stopped believing he would suddenly turn back into the man she once fell in love with. Instead, she found herself drawn to Luther. It began innocently. Shared breakfasts, casual walks along the beach, soft conversations that slipped deeper with each day. But behind the polite smiles and fatherly presence, something far more primal brewed. Luther watched her with eyes that lingered just a second too long. He laughed at her jokes, offered compliments that were slightly too personal, and asked questions Kareem never thought to ask. One afternoon, the villa's air conditioning failed during the sweltering heat of the Jamaican sun. Shanice, sweaty and frustrated, changed into a white cotton sundress. Barefoot, hair tied up, glowing with salt water and sun. She stepped into the kitchen to grab a glass of ice water when she realized Luther was already there, shirtless in linen pants, sipping coffee by the counter. Their eyes met and held. Sorry, I didn't know you were in here," she said, quickly adjusting her dress. He smiled. "No need to apologize. You look peaceful." She laughed nervously. "More like exhausted." "You wear it beautifully," he replied, his voice low, almost a whisper. A silence followed, one that throbbed with tension. And then Luther turned, took a slow step toward her, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You deserve to be seen, Shanice." Her heart pounded. Her body screamed at her to move, to step back, to say something, anything. But she didn't. She stood frozen, intoxicated by the attention, by the rawness, by the fact that anyone still noticed her. And then he did something unthinkable. He kissed her, not forcefully but with confidence, with purpose. A slow, deliberate brush of lips that lingered just long enough to sear into memory. Shanice gasped and stepped back, her fingers to her lips, her eyes wide with shock and adrenaline. I can't," she whispered, voice shaking. Luther nodded, his expression unreadable. "Of course. Forgive me." She fled the kitchen, heart racing, guilt washing over her like a crashing wave. She locked herself in the guest bathroom and stared at her reflection. What the hell just happened? What did this mean? But despite the shame and confusion, there was another feeling simmering beneath it all. Something far more dangerous than guilt. Desire. Luther hadn't just awakened something in her. He had ignited a fire she didn't know existed. One that had been smothered by neglect, indifference, and emotional starvation. She had tried for so long to be the perfect wife, to make her marriage work. But now, for the first time in months, she felt alive. That night, Kareem didn't even ask where she'd been. He was too busy reviewing numbers on his laptop, too lost in a world where love had no place. Shanice lay beside him, eyes open in the darkness, her mind replaying the kiss again and again. A door had been opened, and she wasn't sure she wanted to close it. Once the seal was broken, nothing could hold back the tide. The kiss had been brief, but its effects lingered like perfume on the skin. Shanice couldn't erase it, couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. And most dangerously, she didn't want to. In the days that followed, she and Luther fell into a secret rhythm, an unspoken dance that crackled with tension and possibility. They never addressed the kiss again directly, but everything changed after it. How they looked at each other, how they moved in each other's presence, how the air thickened when they were alone. Even the smallest brush of fingers when passing a dish or reaching for a towel felt electric. The opportunity came quicker than either of them expected. It was a humid Wednesday night. Kareem had stormed out of the villa after a heated phone call with his business partner. He didn't tell Shanice where he was going, just grabbed his keys and left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the wine glasses. Shanice stood at the doorway, shaking, the sting of his cold words still fresh. "You're lucky I brought you here at all." Luther appeared behind her, concern etched across his face. "You okay?" She turned slowly, tears welling in her eyes, her chest heaving. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." Without thinking, he pulled her into his arms. And this time, she didn't resist. His embrace was warm, steady, safe. She buried her face into his chest, breathing in the musky scent of his skin, letting the walls she'd built up for months collapse all at once. "I can't keep pretending," she whispered. "Then don't," Luther replied, lifting her chin gently. They looked at each other, deeply, fully, and the dam burst. Their lips met again, harder this time, desperate, hungry. She clung to him like a drowning woman, and he held her like she was the only thing tethering him to the earth. They stumbled backward into the guest bedroom, tearing at clothes, abandoning guilt and reason with every kiss. For that 1 hour, the rest of the world disappeared. There was only heat, breath, tangled sheets, and the forbidden pulse of a union that should never have happened. Afterward, Shanice lay wrapped in his arms, the sound of the ocean crashing outside their window, a storm echoing the one inside her chest. She didn't speak. Neither did he. There was nothing left to say. They had crossed the line, and now there was no going back. But as they drifted into a fragile sleep, unaware that Kareem had quietly returned and was standing just outside the bedroom door, everything changed. He had come back early, quietly, suspicious, and what he heard behind that door would break him. His wife, his father, together, in his bed. The seed of betrayal was now fully planted, and the blood would follow. Secrets have a way of festering. Like a wound left untreated, they grow beneath the surface, silent, infectious, deadly. After that night, everything shifted between Shanice and Luther. Their affair didn't end with the single act of betrayal. Instead, it evolved into a forbidden routine cloaked in whispers, lingering stares, and stolen hours behind locked doors. They told themselves it was temporary, a vacation fling, a strange, beautiful mistake. But the more they tried to stop, the deeper they sank. The thrill of secrecy became their oxygen. Every encounter was riskier than the last, quick, desperate moments during Kareem's absences. On the beach beneath moonlight, in the villa's private sauna, once even in the shower just minutes before Kareem returned from a business meeting. The fear of being caught only intensified their desire. But they weren't as careful as they believed. Kareem, having heard enough that first night to suspect something unholy was happening, didn't confront them immediately. He observed, waited, watched Shanice more closely, how she reacted when Luther entered the room, how her eyes darted away too fast, how she wore her guilt like perfume no one else could smell but him. He checked her phone one night while she was asleep and found nothing incriminating. Just cleared call logs, unsent drafts, and deleted messages. He began to suspect that whatever was happening between them went beyond lust. And he wasn't wrong, because while the affair started with heat, it was quickly becoming something more complicated. Dangerous even. Shanice wasn't just falling for Luther's touch. She was beginning to romanticize it all. The way he listened to her. The way he spoke to her like she mattered. She told herself this wasn't just about sex. It was love. Real love. And after months of feeling like a ghost in her marriage, That illusion was a drug. But then came the morning she missed her period. First, she dismissed it. The stress, the change in routine, the travel. But when a second week passed with no sign, her chest tightened with dread. A late-night trip to a pharmacy in town confirmed what she feared. She was pregnant, and the timing made it undeniable. This child could not be Kareem's. She stared at the test in the bathroom, hands trembling, stomach twisting into knots. The realization hit her like a hurricane. This wasn't just a secret now. It was a life, a symbol of everything she had done, of everything she had broken. Luther was in shock when she told him. "We need to leave," he whispered, pacing the balcony under the cover of night. "We tell Kareem after the trip. We'll face it like adults. We'll raise the baby together if we have to." "Raise the baby together?" she asked, barely able to speak. "Do you even hear how insane this sounds?" But the truth was, part of her wanted that. She imagined escaping with Luther, starting over, building a life free from the shame, the lies, the weight of her fractured marriage. She told herself it might be possible. What she didn't know was that Kareem had found the test too, hidden at the back of the bathroom drawer, behind travel lotions and feminine products. He didn't confront her, not yet, but that night, as he stood in the dark hallway watching her whisper on the balcony to his father, her hand grazing her stomach as if protecting something, his heart didn't just break, it hardened. What grew inside Shanice wasn't just a child. It was the beginning of a storm that would leave blood in its wake. The heart can only bend so far before it snaps. Kareem Morgan had always seen himself as a man in control. Methodical, focused, calculated. He built his fortune on precision, never letting emotions dictate his actions. But now, standing beneath the swaying palms of their luxury villa, watching the two people he trusted most share intimate glances and hidden touches, that control began to unravel thread by thread. It wasn't just betrayal. It was annihilation of his identity, his wife, his father, and now a child, one he didn't father. For days he said nothing. He wore a mask so perfect that even Shanice believed he might still be too distracted by work to notice her emotional absence. But beneath the surface, Kareem was unraveling. He stopped eating, barely slept. He'd begun drinking quietly, neat rum at noon, whiskey by dusk. On the 10th day of the trip, he sat alone by the pool, his eyes glazed over, watching the waves roll in like they had answers. In his hand was an old family photo, him, Luther, and his late mother, smiling under a mango tree back in Kingston. It had once brought him peace. Now it made him sick. That night, he waited until Shanice had fallen asleep in their room. Exhausted from yet another lie, he slipped out, walked to the guest room, and stood silently at the door. Inside, Luther lay awake. They hadn't spoken in days. Kareem opened the door slowly. Luther looked up. "Something wrong, son?" Kareem stepped in, shut the door gently behind him, and stood there in silence for a long, tense moment. Then softly he said, "You knew how unhappy we were. You watched our marriage fall apart. You gave me advice, told me to fight for her. All the while, you were waiting to take my place." Luther's face tightened. "It wasn't like that." "No." Kareem's voice trembled. "Then tell me what it was like, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you stole my wife and got her pregnant." Luther stood, calm but wary. "It wasn't planned. It just happened." Those words lit the fuse. Kareem lunged, fists clenched, fury exploding. The two men crashed into the nightstand, sending a lamp flying. Luther pushed him off, but Kareem came back harder. Punches flying, a growl rising from deep within his chest like an animal finally unchained. "You were supposed to protect me," Kareem screamed. "You were my father." Their fight was savage, raw, primal. The years of repressed pain, abandonment issues, betrayal, and rage came spilling out in fists and fury. Blood splattered against the white walls, echoing grunts of pain mixing with the crashing of furniture. Shanice woke to the sound of it, bolting upright in bed, her heart pounding. She ran to the guest room and pushed the door open, and stopped cold. Kareem stood over Luther, blood on his knuckles, tears streaming down his face. His father lay slumped against the corner wall, breathing ragged, his face swollen and bleeding. Shanice screamed, "Stop! Kareem, please!" He turned to her, eyes wild, filled with betrayal and something far darker. "Why?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Why him?" Tears streamed down her face. "I don't know." He staggered back, grabbed the edge of the dresser for balance. Then, quietly, he muttered, "It's all gone. Everything. It's all gone." Kareem didn't say another word. He stepped out of the room, walked down the hallway, and disappeared into the shadows of the villa. No one slept that night. The silence that followed was louder than the violence that came before it. The dream vacation was over. Something had broken and no one knew how to fix it. But worse was still to come, because broken men make dangerous choices, and the blood had only just begun to spill. The morning after the violent confrontation, the villa felt as though it had been abandoned. The air was thick with tension, the remnants of last night's destruction still visible. Furniture knocked over, bloodstains on the carpet, and the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore now seemed like a cruel mockery of the peace that once was. Kareem didn't return to the villa. Shanice and Luther waited in a kind of numb limbo, too afraid to speak, too afraid to make any decision. Luther sat silently by the window, his body bruised, his face a canvas of guilt and shock. Shanice paced back and forth, her thoughts spiraling. Was this the end of everything? Her marriage? Her family? The dream she had held onto for so long? And what about the baby? She hadn't spoken to Kareem. He hadn't contacted her either. In the back of her mind, she wondered if he had already made up his mind to leave. Leave everything behind and disappear. The thought of being a single mother, abandoned by both men in her life, weighed heavily on her. But before she could dwell further on those dark thoughts, she heard a car pulling into the driveway. Kareem. Shanice froze, staring at the door, her heart pounding in her chest. The door opened with a creak, and Kareem stepped inside. His clothes disheveled, his eyes hollow, as if the soul had been sucked from his body. He didn't look at either of them as he walked past, heading toward the master bedroom without a word. "Are you okay?" Shanice called after him, her voice trembling. He didn't respond. Instead, he went into the bedroom, slammed the door behind him, and locked it. The silence that followed was oppressive, filling every inch of the villa with an eerie tension. Minutes passed, then hours. Shanice and Luther didn't know what to do. Should they confront him? Should they wait? They could hear Kareem moving around inside the room, but he said nothing. Neither of them dared to approach him. As the evening wore on, a feeling of dread slowly crept over them. Something wasn't right. Kareem had always been a man of action, quick to make decisions, quick to move. He wasn't one to lock himself away like this. Shanice couldn't take it anymore. She stood up, walked toward the bedroom, and placed her hand on the door. Felt cold against her skin. "Kareem?" she called softly, her voice shaking. "Please talk to me." No response. She tried the door handle, but it was locked tight. Panic set in. She banged on the door, shouting his name, her voice rising in desperation. "Kareem, please, open the door." Inside, the room was eerily silent. Luther stood behind her, his face pale. "I think we should call someone. We need to check on him." But Shanice, her heart racing, was already pulling at the door handle again. This time it gave. The door creaked open slowly. What she saw inside would haunt her for the rest of her life. Kareem was lying on the floor of the bedroom, an empty bottle of sleeping pills on the nightstand beside him. His body was still, his face pale, a thin line of blood tracing his lips. He had overdosed. "Kareem!" Shanice screamed, rushing to his side, shaking him, trying to wake him up. But it was too late. Luther stepped back, his face draining of all color. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The man who had once been his hero, who had built an empire, who had protected his family, was now gone. And Luther knew deep down that he was partly responsible for this. It was his fault. But there was no time for guilt. Shanice was sobbing uncontrollably, trying to revive him, but there was nothing they could do. The villa, once a dream escape, had become a tomb. The nightmare they had been living was no longer just a secret. It was a bloodstain on everything they had known. The police arrived shortly afterward. The investigation began, but it was clear to everyone involved that Kareem had taken his own life. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of foul play, just a broken man who had reached the end of his rope. As they began to process the tragedy, Shanice stood in the corner of the room, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. What now? What would happen to the baby? What would happen to her? She had lost her husband. She had lost her family. And now she would have to carry the weight of her actions alone. But even more haunting was the thought that lingered in her mind. Had Kareem's death been inevitable? Or had it been pushed over the edge by the very people he trusted most? Shanice couldn't say. But the one thing she knew for sure was this. Nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The blood had spilled. And now there would be consequences. Kareem's death shattered the remnants of the vacation. The villa, once a symbol of paradise, now felt like a prison. Shanice was consumed with grief, guilt, and fear. She knew the truth, the affair, the pregnancy, and now her actions had led to her husband's death. Luther tried to comfort her, but the weight of their shared guilt was heavy. The police investigation was swift, ruling Kareem's death a suicide, but whispers of infidelity and betrayal lingered. Shanice returned home with the truth heavy on her shoulders, uncertain of what her future would hold. Months passed, and life slowly returned to normal, but it was never the same. Shanice kept her pregnancy a secret from her family and friends, hiding her growing belly behind loose clothing. Luther remained distant, guilt-ridden, and isolated. The affair was a whispered rumor, but no one truly knew the extent of it, until Shanice's family discovered the truth. Her parents confronted her. They were horrified by her actions, especially by the involvement of her father-in-law. The judgment was harsh, the relationship irreparably damaged. Shanice gave birth to a baby girl, but her joy was clouded by the consequences of her past. She moved back to Kingston to start over, leaving the memories of her husband's death and her affair behind. She tried to rebuild her life, but Luther never returned. The father of her child, the man she had once fallen for, had disappeared, leaving her with only the child and the echoes of their shattered past. As Shanice looked at her daughter, she knew that her life would never be the same. The secrets, the lies, the pain, they would always be a part of her, woven into the fabric of her new life.